The shadow of the conquering German armies covered Western Europe. The self-styled master race was riding high. Adolf Hitler stood just as Napoleon had stood more than 100 years before, and looked across the English Channel to the one fighting obstacle that stood between him and world domination. The chalk cliffs of Britain rose sheer and white out of the choppy waters. And beyond, a little island, smaller than the state of Wyoming. Crush that little island and its stubborn people, and the way was open for world conquest. The fall of Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Denmark, Norway, Holland, Belgium, France had given him more than 100 million slaves to work for him or starve. The preliminaries were over. It was time for the main event, the Battle of Britain. Hitler and his generals feverishly drafted their plans for the conquest of Britain. Every detail must be anticipated. A slip now might wreck the whole timetable of world conquest. 6 weeks of final preparation went into those plans. 6 weeks to determine the history of 1,000 years. The jaws of the Nazi whale were set to swallow Jonah.
And what about Jonah? How was he doing? Well, Britain also had an army, but it was an army dragged from the sea at Dunkirk. An army without weapons. These had been left behind on the roads of France. Tanks, guns, motorized equipment, all abandoned to save the one priceless item, men. In all of Britain, there was not enough equipment for one modern division. Only one tank for every 1,000 square miles of territory. Only one machine gun for every 1,500 yards of beach. Britain had a navy, too, but it was scattered all over the globe, guarding vital food and supply lines. And the British knew it would be suicide to use their fleet in the narrow waters of the English Channel with the German Air Force in control of the air. Britain also had an air force. An air force outnumbered 10 to 1 by the enemy, both in men and machines. And then there was Britain herself, the people of Britain, the people who were to be terrorized and forced to surrender. They knew that every man, woman, and child, in uniform or out, would be Hitler's target in the onslaught that might come at any moment. They knew they had a job to do, and not much time to do it in. This was Britain in its darkest hour. The people knew they were in for the worst the Nazi mind could invent, yet they didn't panic or run away. They patrolled and waited. They drilled and waited. They worked and waited. Waited for the terror they knew was coming. Then it came. lost a sound that became part of the life of every man, woman, and child in Britain.
August 8th, 1940, and the battle for Britain is on.
30 enemy aircraft over the channel, flying due west.
Here comes the Luftwaffe. In dozens of flights, hundreds of planes, bombers, fighters, dive bombers, across that 21 miles of channel, that 8 short minutes of water. Their first tactics were to bomb convoys in the channel. Convoys loaded with food and munitions, bound for the great port of London. The RAF came, facing odds of 6, 8, 10 to 1, and dove in, shouting the old hunting cry, tally-ho! First 4 days, the RAF knocked 182 German planes out of the sky.
For the next week, the Germans attacked the coast cities from the Thames River to Weymouth. Paid off with 180 more planes.
Then the Luftwaffe battered the great port towns of Southampton, Plymouth, trying for a knockout before the flow of supplies from overseas became more than a trickle. Battling the Spitfires and Hurricanes in the air wasn't panning out.
So Goering switched his main attacks to the fighter airfields, Dover, Deal, Hawking. Maybe he could destroy the planes on the ground. He bombed the airfields, and the fields were hit. But the planes were saved. For Britain, unlike Poland and the Low Countries, didn't make the mistake of bunching its planes on the runways. The planes of the RAF were scattered and hidden, only a few on any one field, and those in the far corners. The Spitfires still went up to meet the enemy.
In the first 10 days of the Battle of Britain, Goering launched 26 major attacks to get command of the air and lost 697 aircraft. The British lost 153, and 60 British pilots bailed out. Valuable trained men were saved and ready to fight again. In public, Hitler assured the Germans, "Mr. Churchill tells his people that England will win, but I tell you that victory will belong to Germany." But in private, he sent for Goering, the boss of the Luftwaffe, and put him on the hot seat. Goering was told to do something and do it quick. So on August 30th, he ordered all-out attacks on inland aerodromes and industrial centers. Maybe he could knock out the RAF on the assembly line.
Day after day, out of sight and almost out of sound of the watchers on the cliffs, 4, 5, and 6 miles above, the battles raged over the Dover area. The Dover area became known as Hell's Corner. By sheer weight of numbers, the enemy again and again broke through the coastal defenses.
Between August 24th and September 5th, 35 major attacks were launched. They cost the Germans 562 planes, while the British lost only 219 planes and saved 132 pilots. Invasion plans were going completely haywire. The Nazis were blind with rage. The German mind has never understood why free people fight on against overwhelming odds. Hitler now knew he was superior in every weapon except the weapon of spirit. So he told Goering, break that spirit, crush the people, crush the spirit of democratic life itself. Invasion now would have to wait. The Nazis would avoid the RAF and smash the great city of London into the rubble heap they had made of Warsaw and Rotterdam.
Could London take it? Even the people themselves didn't know the answer. The defenses they trusted in were London's hastily assembled anti-aircraft, the Ack-Ack guns, the balloon barrage which kept the raiders at high altitudes, the Royal Air Force, now down to its last reserves, and the plain, downright guts of the people.
That day, when 375 German planes came roaring up the Thames River, the Battle of Britain became the Battle of London. The Germans broke through the charge of Hurricanes and Spitfires that went out to meet them. Gone was any pretense of aiming at military objectives. This was just savage destruction.
In the 28 days of terror from September 7th to October 5th, the Nazis dropped 50 million pounds of bombs on the city, killed 7,000 helpless civilians, and wounded 10,000 more.
The frantic Nazis had to pull a new one. They did. On October 6th, they changed to night attacks. Maybe that way they could avoid those deadly Spitfires and Hurricanes. Maybe that way they could crush the stubborn British spirit. Never mind control of the air. Never mind Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. Now to concentrate on bombing the people themselves into submission and make them cry for mercy.
In the midst of this life and death struggle, the British found strength not only to defend, but to counterattack with what few bombers they could get together.
Night gangsters, for this crime I will exact 1,000-fold revenge. All the available German night bombers were put into the air.
On the night of November 14th, 1 million pounds of bombs were dropped on the city.
Hitler could kill them, but damned if he could lick them. They went back to their lathes and machines, for they knew the machine bench was as deadly a weapon as the rifle. And in their hearts was a grim determination that this enemy must be destroyed. That the day was coming when they would strike back, and how they would strike back.
Christmas, season of peace on earth, goodwill toward men, was the ironic quiet before Hitler's great burst of rage against a people who couldn't be licked. submission. So he would burn them to ashes.
Millions of firebombs rained down on the great city of London. In the months to come, the British were to suffer many such bombings and burnings. But a nation that calls on cold courage when hot courage runs thin may die, but it can't be defeated. The Battle of Britain was won, but not by Hitler. Hitler had lost the battle. He had lost 2,375 German planes and their crews. For the first time, it was the Germans who ate the bitter dirt of defeat. Gone was the legend of their invincibility. For a solid year, the Nazis struck Britain with all their might. They leveled thousands upon thousands of homes and damaged millions of others. They killed more than 40,000 men, women, and children, and seriously wounded 50,000 more. But not one single Nazi soldier set foot on British soil. The British did more than save their country. They won for the world a year of precious time. It was not only for the people of Britain, but for the people of the world that Winston Churchill spoke when he said,
"Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few."